Dwight Mihalicz, who is going to make a presentation today. Dwight is a really well-respected professional expert in the field of performance management and in finding more effective ways to measuring performance and results. This is an area that I'm challenged in my work, so I'm really interested in hearing some of the work he's doing. He is president and founder of the Effective Managers, Inc. He's also a certified management consultant like myself, and a fellow business excellent. He's a fellow with the Business Excellence Institute. He also brings a pretty unique perspective as being the past chair of the International Council of Management Consultants Institute. So that's something that CMC reports up into or affiliated with. So Dwight, without further ado, I'll pass it over to you and I'll monitor the chats and let you know as questions come in.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And thank you all to the attendees today. I'm looking forward to sharing some information with you. And I would just like to really stress, I'm a big fan of the chat box. So if any questions come up to you or occur to you while we're going through, just jot them in there because that will help keep track of them. I'm planning to leave some time at the end so that we can explore those in a discussion session. But if anything comes up, Jennifer, that seems really relevant to the topic and that you'd like to raise, just jump in and let me know. So my starting point is to ask a question, and this is a question that always bothered me as a manager, as an executive, as heads of organizations. Why do your best people go home every night feeling badly about what they didn't get done instead of feeling good about what they did get done? And I don't know if you're like me. I feel like that a lot nowadays too. It seems you come in the morning, the idea, the to-do list you had in the shower in the morning just doesn't get done because things happen in the organization. And it's kind of all inclusive. There's just a lot of stuff happening. If you're the person in the organization, you have your role. And I kind of think of it like this person holding up the puzzle piece. This is my piece of the puzzle. If I can get this done, then I'm going to have a successful day, and I'm going to get my to-do list done, and I'll be helping the organization to be more successful as well. But once you get into the organization, things look a little bit more like this. You are just being pulled in many different directions. Your peers are asking your stuff, your team members are asking you for things. People on other parts of the organization are asking you to do things. You've got meetings to go to, you've got email to read, you've got reports to prepare. So all of that stuff gets in the way. So that during the day, that piece of the puzzle starts to feel more and more like this, that, you know, how the heck am I going to be able to get this job done? So what I'd like to do in terms of today's session is give you a little bit of information, starting in terms of thinking about strategy from organizations, some research that's been done that I think really shines insight on this, and then introduce you to a model that we use at Effective Managers that really helps to clarify what are those things that, from the perspective of the head of the organization or from the perspective of a management consultant, that we need to keep in balance for organizations. And it really does start this feeling of inadequacy in terms of being able to get to the work that needs being done, does start with the strategic plan. And what we find through research, this is Dr. Cotter published this research not too long ago, that only 5% of organizations can successfully implement their strategies. 70% fail, and the other 25% are somewhere in the middle. So there's a lot going on in organizations that causes this. We also find that this applies in a broad variety of ways. So it's not only strategies, any major change program, I'm sure you've all read research on this yourselves. Most major change programs, about 70% of them, the same number, fail to successfully deliver the results that were intended. So we have the same kinds of things that are at play here in terms of what's happening in organizations. So starting with the strategy, and I like to think about strategy as probably the most significant change program that an organization has in place. Most organizations are pretty good at developing their strategy. They do all of the work that's necessary to develop their vision for the organization. They can picture this Pegasus that they want to be in 3 to 5 years. They do the environmental analysis. They consult throughout the organization. They do the competitive analysis, and they really come up with what they feel their strategy needs to be. And they put a lot of time and effort into it and mobilize the organization to really be involved. And yet 3, 5, whatever many years down the road that they imagine to be the Pegasus, they end up looking a little bit more like this. So not a total failure. It's still kind of a horse, but it's not at all what was imagined by the CEO and by the board when this was put in place, and that the strategy was envisioned. So it really comes down to strategy development being one thing, but strategy execution being another thing. So on balance, organizations tend to make their strategies too complex and too all-inclusive in terms of what it is that they're trying to achieve. And conversely, they tend to make their strategy implementation too simplistic and too informal. So what I'd like to do now is share with you in the next few slides some research that will really cast light on what's happening inside organizations and how client organizations can try to turn this around, and how we as management consultants can help them to do that. So the starting point is with the Gallup organization. I love the work that Gallup has been doing over the last couple of decades. They've really been digging into what's happening inside organizations. They have programs for measuring employee engagement and what's happening. And the most where do I want to start with this sentence? From the perspective of most organizations and most executives inside organizations, there's an understanding that employee engagement is a good thing. Where it gets hard is to start thinking about how do we actually ensure that our employees are more engaged. And I think there's a bit of a lack of understanding about exactly how powerful this is. So I've pulled this research out of the 2021 report from Gallup, which takes a look at the top quartile of engaged employees. So those organizations who are in the top quartile of engaged employees, and compares the performance of organizations who are in the bottom quartile of engaged employees. So kind of comparing the best to the worst, if you will, in that sense. And it's a major study. This was done globally. Over almost 3 million, 2.7 million employees were surveyed, 112,000 work units, 276 organizations in 96 countries. So it really, really is representative of what's going on in the organization. And what we find when we compare the top quartile to the bottom quartile, in the top quartile, there's a 66% higher well-being scores. There's 81% less absenteeism. There's 41% less quality incidents, 18% lower turnover, 10% higher customer loyalty, 18% higher productivity, and you're going to really like this one, 23% higher profitability. So something really, really fundamental is happening in those organizations that are able to get the employee engagement right. Now, this isn't about employee engagement, but I did want to give you these insights to what's happening. And if we look at the data that's come in again in 2021 from Gallup, what we see is that that globally, since the year 2000, employee engagement scores have been increasing slightly, and it is slight. So that creates, in my mind, the most fundamental question: if employee engagement is so powerful, why is it that we're not able to increase those scores more? Why aren't more and more organizations tending towards what that top quartile looks like? And why is the average still down around 36%? I'll come back to that in a minute. If we look at the US and Canada, it shows, oh, I'm sorry, that was the US and Canada where it continued to increase. I'm sorry. Blue is US and Canada. If we look at it globally, though, which was started measuring more around 2007, we find that employee engagement actually dropped off a couple of points in 2020. And if we look at the top quartile, just to show you what can be achieved in organizations, we're running at 73% in the year 2020. So let's put employee engagement aside for a minute here. Now, I would like to do is turn on to some research. This one when you see the date of the research back in 1989, you'll say, well, that's been a while ago. But in my experience in organization, this is still going on. Sydney Yoshida did this study called the Iceberg of Ignorance. And in it, through research in organizations, he concluded that only 4% of an organization's frontline problems are known by top management. So isn't that interesting? So only 4% of the problems that frontline people are facing on a day-to-day basis are understood by the top of the organization. And that breaks down. It changes as you get closer and closer to the front line. So if you look at middle management, about 9% of the problems are known. If you get a little closer to the front line, 74% of the problems are understood by supervisors. And who knows all of the problems? Of course, it's the employees. They're the ones that are dealing with the customers day in and day out. They understand what these problems are. So this is a sobering statistic, if you think about it, that from the top of the organization, 4% of executives are aware of 4% of the problems. But there's a flip to this. And the flip side I was really interested to read was put together by Larry McCannis, who's president and CEO of Thinkway. And he flipped it and showed that, in fact, the opposite is also true. So in terms of those problems that are being faced by the executive at the top of the organization, only 4% of those problems are understood by the front line of the organization. So this is very enlightening. And if you think about it in terms of the way organizations work, it's very, very helpful to think about, because work is different at different levels in the organization. At the front of the organization, you're working through processes and procedures on a day-to-day basis to solve problems, to overcome issues, to serve customers, to do all of those things that you do on the front line. So it's really the sharp end of the implementation of our programs or services, and ultimately of the strategy of the organization. At the top of the organization, the work is much more complex. You're thinking out 3, 5, maybe even 10 years in larger organizations in terms of what are the things that we need to do starting today so we can achieve our strategy over the coming years. So in fact, there's not a need for the top of the organization to understand 100% of the problems at the front end. Certainly within the organization, it needs to be understood. Certainly the implications of that need to be understood. And who is it that's accountable for ensuring that the right amount of information is flowing up the organization and the right context is flowing down the organization? Those are the middle managers in the organization. Those are the people that need to take those strategic decisions, those strategic goals, and translate them down to the next level in meaningful terms and cascade that down to the organization, to the front end. So this dynamic that was identified by Yoshida is actually an appropriate mechanism inside organizations of delegating work appropriately and escalating issues appropriately. So that's first where I introduced managerial leadership. I'd like to bring you one more piece of research, which is really interesting. This one was published by Heskett. It was published in Harvard Business Review in 2008, and it's based on research that was first published in Harvard Business Review back in 1994. And he laid out the service profit chain, and in its most simplistic form. And in those days, we were talking about employee satisfaction. So employee engagement, today's measure, is a bit more sophisticated. But the findings he had in 2008 is that if you have employees who are satisfied with their work, they will result in providing better customer service, which will result in customers being more satisfied with the results in dealing with that organization, and you will have a longer lifetime value of customers. So he built the service profit chain to show that if you have more satisfied employees, you're going to end up with a situation where you can actually increase revenue and increase profits. I quote this survey because this research, because it's been redone many, many times in many, many different forums in different sectors and in different cultures around the world. So it does hold true that if you can have employees that are more engaged, more satisfied with their work, that these things will happen. And I led off with some of the results that you get from more engaged employees. So that really does show there. But the point I wanted to make is in Heskett's research, as he outlined the different elements in terms of driving employee satisfaction, and customer results, there was only one paragraph that talked about managerial leadership. And in that entire research program, the discussion was that managerial leadership is necessary to underpin all of the different processes and functions that are in place to support the service profit chain and have an impact in different areas. So at Effective Managers, we've actually taken that to the next step. And in our research, which we partnered with at the Telfer School of Management here at the University of Ottawa, was to understand what's happening in organizations in terms of the managerial impact on things like the service profit chain. And what we were able to show through the research that we did then and through practical applications with client organizations since then is that managerial leadership is in fact the driver of employee engagement. And Gallup has recently come out, in fact, in early 2020, they've published books to talk about the manager experience and how important the role of the manager is inside the organization to ensure that these kinds of results are happening. So one of the most fundamental issues that we have in client organizations in terms of improving employee satisfaction is that there's a tendency to try to impact change at the symptomatic level. In other words, working with the employees to try to change their working conditions or change things in different ways to support their work there, hoping for better employee engagement, when in fact you need to start at the management level because it is managers doing their managerial leadership work in the appropriate way and at the appropriate times that leads to this improvement in employee satisfaction. So managerial leadership then is the key ingredient required for successful organizational change. That manager, the managers inside the organization are the link in the chain between the implementation of strategy and the execution of that strategy across the organization. In terms of managerial leadership, I'd like to pause on that for just a second because it's a really important concept. In many organizations, as a management consultant, what I've observed is that management is often left to the managers who have the title of manager. In other words, those individuals who are at the front end of the organization managing frontline workers. But in fact, managerial leadership for this chain not to be broken needs to be carried out at each level of the organization. So the head of the organization, the CEO or the executive director or the general manager, whatever the title of that head might be, is critically important for their managerial leadership work to be done as well. I've worked as a consultant often in client organizations where the owner or the head of the organization says, well, you know, I've hired really competent people. I pay them really good money. They helped in the development of the strategy. Now I just expect them to go ahead and do the implementation and to run their shops appropriately. So as far as that goes, it's okay, but where it falls down is in having that single focus for the strategy of the organization. If we want to accomplish something as an organization and it involves a major change, whether it's increase in profit, going into a new market, whatever it might be, this requires a realignment of the resources across the organization. Because we're not going to be doing things in exactly the same way moving forward. And if the head of the organization doesn't do their managerial leadership work to really ensure that how we work together is starting to change over time, then it's not going to be successful. Hence the 70% not achieving strategy. And this is because each individual, those highly paid individuals that report to the head of the organization, have filters. So the interpretation of the head of finance for what we need to accomplish this strategy is going to be around what do we need to do in finance to improve this strategy. The head of sales is going to be thinking, well, how do we have to do sales differently? How can we improve sales in order to achieve this strategy? Head of operations is going to be thinking about how can we improve production? What do we need to do differently to improve strategy? But in organizations, resources are limited. It's not possible to do everything. And this needs to be a quartered activity. So the only person in the organization that has the authority and the ability, the context to be able to set this context for how we will work differently starting tomorrow is the head of the organization. And that's managerial leadership. It's sitting down with your immediate subordinates, in this case, the executives of the organization, working through what that means for those departments, who gets additional resources, who might get fewer resources, how we all link all of that activity into the successful implementation of the strategy. So this front part has been really an introduction to give you some insight into the passion that I have for managerial leadership, ensuring that everyone inside organizations does have that accountability and authority and understanding, that delegated accountability to really focus in on what needs to be done in terms of the managerial leadership. And I use the two words proactively. So it's managerial leadership is what do I have to do as a manager, and leadership, what do I need to do as a leader. So what I'd like to do now is introduce you to the model. We'll be digging a bit deeper into this model tomorrow, and I have a couple of case statements for you in the session tomorrow where I'll demonstrate how organizations have used this approach. One organization has used this approach successfully, and a few others have not used it successfully at all. So I'll give you a negative and a plus case study. But I wanted to introduce the model to you today so you can get a bit of thought on it, and then we will have a few minutes as well for discussion and comments from you. So here I am getting ahead of myself. So we're starting the thinking about a tree. My practice is based globally, so I have a network of partner firms around the world, and I remember working with my colleagues in one of the countries, and as we were about to start an implementation with a program, they were asking me rightfully, what are all the different parts that we need to be looking at, and how does it all tie together? So we got a big whiteboard, and I was drawing, and as usual in these exercises, I ended up with a lot of squares, a lot of circles, a lot of wavy lines, and a lot of dotted lines, and so on. And it looked really, really complex. And on the plane on the way home, I thought we really need to come up with an analogy that helps to simplify what needs to be in balance inside organizations for them to be successful. And ultimately I ended up with the model of a tree. So trees are beautiful things. Trees are organic. In many cases, you can think of organizations as organic as well. Trees produce a lot that are helpful to mankind. Organizations also produce a lot that can be helpful to people. Trees also have an ability somehow to survive in situations where you'd think nothing should survive. So here we have some pictures from my adopted province of Ontario on the Shield, where trees are growing out of the side of rocks, and you think, well, that's not possible, and yet there it is. And it's the same as organizations. Often you'd think an organization has a business model is just not going to work, and yet over time they do succeed, and they are able to make it work. And then you can look at it from the other perspective. Sometimes you have trees who are there, they have a great business model, you think they have the resources and the wherewithal to be very successful, and yet they're not. So that happens to trees sometimes, it happens to organizations sometimes as well, where they're just not able to move forward in the way that they should in terms of doing the work that they need to do. So in terms of thinking about the elements of a tree, then there are 9 different elements that I'd like to provide to you, and just give you kind of the 1 or 2 minute for each of them. And because tomorrow's session, we'll be spending a bit more time talking about this. And then in the panel on the next day, which is Thursday, we'll be getting deeper insights, because that's where we can really get the panel discussions going in terms of what are those different factors that need to be in balance for successful organizations. And don't forget the chat. So if you have thoughts or anything you want to share, do start filling up that chat, because we have some time coming up where I really want to hear what your thoughts are about this. So the starting point is really the bedrock. In terms of the tree, the bedrock is necessary because the bedrock is what is creates the stability for the entire tree. If you don't have that stability of a bedrock, trees aren't going to do very well. For the organization, that's the business model, and the business model really is about what are we making or developing, and to whom are we selling it. So it's the what and the who of the organizations. You don't get much more fundamental than that. And whole organizations are built on that concept. Somebody has an idea about a new product or a new service, figures out who the target market is that could benefit from that, and start building the organization. The second component is the strategy, and the strategy really is about how do we go about differentiating ourselves from our competitors or alternatives in the marketplace, so that we can ensure that we are able to produce, manufacture, sell, and deliver to our clients those things that we aspire to. And how do we intend to change over the future? So the business model and the strategy become hand in hand. The strategy is alike to the topsoil in the organization. That's the food for the tree. The topsoil is what creates the nutrients for the tree to survive. The strategy is that which drives the activity in the organization, because that is what develops and delivers the results that we expect to have and change over time. And then the third part is the organization design itself, and this is like the root structure of the tree. So the roots of the tree are that which connects the topsoil. They gather the nutrients and they provide the support for the organization. So they have that double function of creating the stability for the organization, but also feeding the nutrients into the tree. Sorry, mixing my analogy here. From the perspective of the organization, it's exactly the same. The organization needs an organization that is able to deliver the programs and services that are necessary now, but it also has to be flexible enough so that as the organization gets more complex, the changes that need to be put in place can be put in place in a way that makes sense and that is sustainable. So these are all the structural elements of the organization. So just as in a tree, it provides the stability, the bedrock, and the topsoil. In the organization, it provides the who we are, what we do, our strategy for change over the future, and the organization design in terms of what we want to do and how we're going to go about doing it. I'll switch now to kind of the output factors. So the first one is culture, and I do think of culture as an output in the organization, because culture is a result of all of the activities, the decisions that are being made, the way in which we act and collaborate within the organization. So in the tree, the culture is the framing of the tree. It's the limbs, the branches. It determines the shape of the tree. In the same way, inside an organization, the culture determines how we do business with each other and how we do business outside of the organization. So it's critically important. You can change the shape of the tree by working with it over time. You can prune it and you can feed it in different ways, so it will change its appearance in the same way that you can modify the culture inside an organization over time. So it has similarities in both of those ways. If the culture is in place and people are doing the right work and collaborating in the right way, that will drive performance. So the performance of the organization is driven to a large extent by the culture. In other words, how we make decisions, what our values are, and what are the decisions and action that we take based upon those values. The performance is akin to the leaves in the tree. So if you have bright green leaves, you've got a very healthy tree, for those that are supposed to have green leaves, of course. For the organization, the performance is detailed in our output measures. So how much are we making? How much are we selling? What's our level of quality? What are our margins? What is our profit? So these are the output measures that are often the focus of how we work together as an organization. And then finally, the fruit of the tree is like the profit of the tree. So these are the outcome measures that need to be looked at. So as you saw from the title of this presentation, as we're talking about balanced metrics, my experience is that in many cases, organizations spend just too much time measuring and monitoring the performance and the profit of the organization, and not thinking about some of what I call the input side of the equation, which is how we go about doing those things inside the organization. So that brings me then to the inside of the organization, which is like the trunk of the tree. So no tree is going to be successful or stable if it doesn't have a healthy trunk, which provides that connection between its root system and its foliage. In the organization, we need a similar kind of structure in place, which provides that enactment of the strategy, the business model through the organization designed to achieve our culture, our performance, and our profit. So this is the inside, the input part of the organization, or the people part of the organization. So the first element that needs to be in place is an accountability and authority model. So accountability and authority is really about how do we manage here? How do we work together in this organization? How do we collaborate in this organization? And it's like the bark of the tree trunk. It encompasses everything, because that accountability and authority framework is really all about how we work together, how we delegate work, and how we collaborate with each other. Without an accountability and authority framework, we end up with situations where people aren't clear about what they're accountable for, and we end up with situations where people aren't clear about how they collaborate with each other, which leads to silos and role conflict throughout the organization. The second element is managerial leadership, and managerial leadership is all about how do we provide the managerial leadership that we need to throughout the organization. Are managers, first and foremost, doing their managerial leadership work? When it comes to the life of a manager's work usually falls into three buckets. The first bucket is what do I have to do today to keep the shop running? So that keeps them pretty busy. I call that the job description work. There's the 10 things that they need to do in terms of their job description for doing that work. The second bucket are the project kind of project things that have been delegated, things that have short timelines. It might be a change project, or it might be a project team that they're leading or that they're sitting on in order to accomplish something. So those are time bound. People have to deliver against those timeframes. So that's important work. The third bucket is the managerial leadership work. Are you having the meetings with your team members? Are you giving them coaching? Are you setting them context? Do you have your own plan in place for your own department or your own business unit in terms of where you're taking it over the year, over the coming time frame, in order to support the strategy of the organization? Are you coaching? Are you giving positive and corrective feedback where it's necessary, and so on? So all of these things are really, really important. But come back to the important versus the urgent. All of these things are important, but how often have you heard in organizations, oh, geez, I know we have our one-on-one today, but we're all really busy. So let's put it off for this week and we'll come back to it next week. Or a meeting gets canceled, or the performance management meetings, which should be held on a weekly or monthly basis, end up being quarterly or annual. So that managerial leadership work often gets set aside because of the pressure of the day-to-day routine. It's all those signs I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. So what we really do need to do is bear in mind and be thoughtful of what managers need to do. What are they accountable for, and how do we help managers to free up the time that they need to do the work that they need to do? And why do we need to do that? Going back to some of those slides I showed you earlier, if we want employees to feel engaged, they need to be led by their managers in terms of all of those things that I mentioned that managers need to do. So you can tell I found my passionate spot there. Then moving on to the third one is managerial capability. So managerial capability is about ensuring that every manager in the organization, and again, I use manager in the generic way, anyone that has an accountability for a team has the problem-solving capability to do their work, so they're able to work at the right level of complexity in the organization, that they have the skills and knowledge that they need to do their work. How many managers in how many organizations learn by doing or learn on the job and don't get the coaching or don't even get the formal training in terms of what a manager needs to do? Too many, I'm afraid, and the examples that they have to work with are not that great in most organizations, I have to say as well. So how do we help managers learn those skills and knowledge? And then the third part is valuing the work. Do managers that have been appointed to managerial roles, again, whether it's director, VP, or the head of the organization, do they really value the job of managing? Do they value encouraging their people to do better? Do they value coaching? Do they value giving performance feedback, and so on? So that area is thought of as the people side of the organization. So so the input measures, how do we ensure that our people are aligned and are focused in on doing the right work? So we've got the structure right, and if we can get our people in place, focused in on the right work, doing the right things at the right time, getting the right people in the right roles, then we'll get the kinds of results that we want on the output measures. But you know, as they say, what gets measured gets done. So if we have all of our focus on those output measures, the performance and the profit kinds of measures, we're not going to have the kind of success that we need on the people side. Oh, I'm sorry, I clicked the wrong side of the button there. I just wanted to make one more part about managerial capability. That box can also read fit to role. So if we're working with the whole organization and thinking about frontline employees as well, then those same three dimensions of for success apply to the front line. So how do we get the right people into the right role, doing the right things, applies right down. But here we're focusing today on the managerial capability part. So I wanted to get this done by 12:45, so I'm just a little bit ahead. So that means I have been speaking faster than I intended because I got excited about my content. But what I did want to stress, I've got a few more things I wanted to raise with you, but I did want to stress that I will respond to your questions and would appreciate your insights. But I do want to now open it up for questions because I wanted to leave lots of time for us to be able to have this discussion. I'm so pleased to see that that we were well attended and that there's such a great audience here. So please do share your thoughts and constructive insights as well, because not everybody will agree with everything that I've said today. So let's get some of that discussion going. So while you're thinking about your thoughts, and I see that some are starting to come in now, that's great. I wanted to just let you know that I do have additional information or resources, so if you want to get a bit more information about these things on my YouTube channel and in the resources tab of the website. Also, feel free, you've got my LinkedIn contact in the chat box, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love that, or to subscribe to my newsletter. So what I'm going to do now is stop the share so that we can see each other better. And change to my gallery view. There we go. And let's see what some of the questions are. Jennifer, turn it back to you for those questions.
Yeah, so an interesting one is as you have the tree and organic and where the environment in which the trees survive. I think is Adelwyn. I don't know if I pronounced your name right there. Adelwyn.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
There you go. Had mentioned that it wasn't incorporated into the model, and what about the external factors that impact the organization's ability as a whole?
Oh yes, so So in terms of external factors, they are in the environment. And you're right. I didn't say a lot about the environment of the organization, but it's absolutely correct. I guess I maybe implied it a bit, showing that some trees can survive growing on the side of a cliff, and some seem to manage to die in the middle of a meadow. So when we work with with organizations in the strategy, of course, that comes in big time, because you really do need to understand those environmental factors. So I think those of us in organizations and those of us that are management consultants always have this balancing act that we have to try to find between not making things too complex and not making things too simple. So how do we find that right balance in the guidance and advice that we're doing? So it's a question of looking at those factors, but not spending too much time on those factors. It's more about how do they impact us and the decisions we need to make.
Okay. Marvin Wilson had a question, was where does process development fit into this model?
Process development is at the front end of the organization. So if we think about frontline workers, the work at that level of complexity is how do we follow processes and procedures in order to do work as effectively as possible. So the role of level 2 workers, which are managers in the organization, we'll be getting into this a bit more in our session tomorrow, but the role of managers in the organization is to ensure that we can proceduralize as much work as possible. So let's make work as efficient and as effective as possible. And in the creation of those policies and procedures, they need to train your level 1 workers to do that. So it's incredibly important work, and it does need to take place inside the organization. And it does happen primarily at level 1.
Okay, and that's a question I had about where like business process and everything fits in, but I thought maybe it was around performance as well. So Nav had mentioned just a great, a very attractive, thoughtful presentation, but just the challenge. Do you not find it challenging to engage employees when organizations work simultaneously from different places around the world?
Yes. So organizations do have different levels of complexity in terms of how engaged can their employees be. So around the world, certainly, but even now, hopefully soon post-pandemic or post the crush of the uncertainty of the pandemic, with the increasing number of employees who will be working away from the organization remotely. The whole hybrid workforce is going to be a much bigger factor than it was in 1999. And I think it will continue to be as well. So all of those things do make the job of a manager harder. So I might have a direct report that's on the other side of the world, or I might have 2 direct reports that I never see, because even though they're in the same city, they're working from home, and the organization has decided that they should stay working from home. So how do you balance all of those things? So part of the challenge that we have as management consultants is working with client organizations to help them understand what are the systems and processes that you need to have in place. Number 1, to ensure that your delegation of work is clear, and number 2, to be getting feedback from your remote employees wherever they are in terms of how well they're doing, not only in terms of the output measures, the productivity that is typically measured, but also in terms of their own personal well-being, their ability to communicate with their team members, and so on.
Okay. Here's one from Margaret. She's talking about her organization's created a strategic plan, and now they have developed a performance measurement plan. We've identified the activities and the key performance indicators. So I guess her question is, when you situate it within a model like this, what should be or where are our next steps? If you were to look at that, we have a plan, we have indicators. What are some next steps that they should look at?
Okay, that's wonderful. So that's the starting point. So the plan will have in place its strategic goals. So what do we want to look like? What's the Pegasus look like for our organization? So that's the starting point. And then the key performance indicators are also important. So those are measures that you as the head of the organization can watch just to make sure how are we doing as an organization. Between those two is the objective setting exercise. And that is so from the owner whose personal plan is the strategic plan, at the next level you have your executives. What is the plan of each one of those executives in terms of what they need to accomplish within a certain time frame, that they will be measured on in terms of contributing towards the attainment of that strategic plan? And it'll be different for each of them. So the head of the organization really needs to work with each one of their direct reports to document and delegate clearly what needs to happen by when, in order for the head of the organization to be successful. And then that process needs to be repeated. So with my clients, we have a process called the value-added plan, where each manager, each person who's accountable for a team, literally has a plan which is cascading underneath the overall strategic plan and cascades down in the organization, so that you're able to delegate in terms of quality, quantity, timeliness, and what resources do you need to do that, and then manage performance against that. So key performance indicators let you know how the organization is going, and the conversations around those value-added plans lets you find out how your teams are doing.
Perfect. Can you talk about strategy implementation being too simplistic? I think you mentioned and informal. So can you just elaborate on that?
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly along the lines of what I'm mentioning about the value-added plan. So typically what happens, there's so much time and so much energy spent on developing the strategy. The board or the CEO, depending on the complexity of the organization, gets the sign off on the strategic plan, and everybody goes, no, we've done that. Now all we have to do is implement it. When in fact, the hard part of the job is the implementation side. So that's when the work really needs to start, where the head of the organization and the executive then need to roll up our sleeves. Okay, we've agreed this is what we need to do. We need to do it in the next 3 years. This is what has to be in place. So what has to happen differently starting tomorrow in terms of each one of your roles, and in terms of the head of the organization? What do I need to do differently as well? And delegate that clearly. So that's where the value-added plan comes in, a way is documenting those discussions and ensuring that you're on the same page. So each manager and each subordinate have a mutually understood agreement of what the focus is and what the objectives are that need to be attained over what period of time. It also becomes really important in terms of, as things change, coming back to the environment, things will change over time. So if we're adding priorities, what does that mean to the value-added plan? What comes off? What changes? What's the change in focus? So these conversations need to be ongoing.
Perfect. So I had one from Stephen here about, can strategy be successfully implemented at the same time when an organization requires significant change? So I'm not sure if he's linking into how does the strategy fit with the change management plan, but just looking at that in relation to significant change.
Reading between the lines in your question, Stephen, it sounds like the organization needs a bit of a turnaround, but also wants to have a strategy. So my sense would be that the turnaround needs to be part of the strategy. So those two things need to be two sides of the coin. So if we want to be that Pegasus in the next 4 years, but we understand that there's some fundamental problems in terms of our organization design or the market we're in, or increasing competition, whatever it might be. We need to really think about how those things can be married together and how they all come together. One of the biggest issues, another big issue, keep talking about issues and strategy. One of the issues is that we often try to be a sponge instead of a razor, and soak in all of these different things we want to accomplish, and just get such a big laundry list of what we want to do over a relatively short period of time that we just can't be successful. So we're kind of our own enemy. So I would say the major change program should be part of the strategy and implemented into all of the overall objectives.
Okay.
Thanks, Stephen.
What about in terms of, Travis was just asking, what's the typical size of a company that is most successful in strategy implementation, or does size even matter when you look at those that have been successful compared to those who are not?
I don't know the exact answer to that question. That's a great one. That's why I love these things. You always learn new things. So, because I will learn that before the next session, and I'll pass that on. In terms of all of the meta research I've looked at, it looks at all sizes of companies in all cultures from around the world. So the Cotter research, for example, which came up that I referred to earlier, was based on several hundred organizations that were around the world. So my suspicion is it does apply to all sizes of companies, but I don't know that for a fact, so I will look into it. And maybe somebody on the call might have an answer for that. So if you do, let me know. What I do know from personal experience is that even the larger multinational corporations that I've worked with do have troubles along these lines in terms of how do we get the right focus for exactly what we knew. They have the advantage of momentum, so they've got this huge size that is carrying the organization in a certain direction. So it's an advantage in terms of having more time to be able to make change. But on the other hand, making the change is more difficult because you've got more people to bring on board.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sorry I don't have the exact question for that one, but I hope that helps. And if anybody does know about that research and can pop in, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll have it for tomorrow's session.
Perfect. So there's two here. One, I just want to pop to Tracy had said, are you seeing an increasing number of organizations, including organizational health measures, employee engagement into their KPIs, strategic plan and KPIs? To that, I want to see if you could answer a question on how do you convince senior leadership that this is the way to go? Because their natural tendency ingrained in them is to look, as you say, those throughput measures and the performance, the apple that is produced from a tree. So just wondering about that. So are you seeing the trend towards this, and what's it take to convince the senior leadership team that these are important, critical to success?
I guess there's two parts to the answer. It depends, because I noticed I looked at the registration list, and there's a good selection of people that are executives and heads of client organizations, as I would call it, from the consulting side, and a mix of consultants. So from the perspective of the consultant, our job is to be that objective expert that can speak truth to power. I know it's an old trite saying, but it is exactly that. If you want to change what's happening in your organizations, these are some of the things that need to change. And these are some of the things that impact you personally that you'll have to do differently if you want to, from my observation, that you'd have to do differently for success in your organization. From the perspective of the organization itself, it really is being true to oneself. So the head of the organization, if it's an entrepreneurial situation, has built that organization up from nothing to something that's really, really successful. So they need to really think about, how do I need to do things differently to move on to the next level? So reaching out to someone who can bring that objective advice to them, such as a management consultant, can be very helpful. There are also other methods. There are peer group advisory boards, such as Tech Canada in Canada, where you can get that kind of peer group insight to support you. And in the largest organizations, you can afford to hire the specialized expertise that you need to support you in some of these things.
Perfect. So I have two more questions. I have lots I could ask, but I'm going to leave it up to the participants. Brian, I have a question from Brian McKay. He and I used to work together. Nice to see you, Brian. Is your value-added plan a way of layering onto what people are already doing in the day-to-day in their work plan? And how does this strike a realistic balance? I was wondering if you were talking an ops plan to a business plan to a strategic plan, if that's what you meant by value-added plan. That seems to be what Brian's asking as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. That's a good point, and they have to be married in some way. So you have the position description, which is one means of delegating and measuring what someone's accountable for, and the value-added plan really does focus more on what are those change things that I need to do to help with success from my perspective in my role for the implementation of the strategy. But you can't have the two separate completely, because there's only so many hours in the day and the person only has so many resources. So as the manager, part of the job is to help them create that understanding of priorities between day-to-day work and change activities that need to be in place. So that's what makes managing really hard, because it would be really easy if we can just decide what needs to be done and tell people to do it and let them work it out. which happens in a lot of organizations, unfortunately. But if we do that, the people on the front end that have to make the choices between too many tasks and not enough time will make those choices. And do we as a manager really want people independently deciding what's more important, or do we want to set the context in terms of how we should be driving our team forward? So it does make it tougher, Brian, but they do need to be integrated.
Yeah. Okay, one last question. And just to let you know, I did notice John Bork is here too, so you might want to give a shout out to him as you close off. So I don't know if any of the other panel are there, but hi, John, nice to see you. Pierre Cormier had said, just look, he's looking at training and coaching. And I think where do you see the difference or the preference when trying to make work change? Is it better to focus on the coaching side or the actual more formal training?
Yeah, I think in terms of roles, the training is critically important because you need to ensure that the skills and knowledge are in place, that you and particularly with the strategy, if there's fundamental change, there might be changes in skill sets. So you need the training in place to make sure that that fundamental baseline of skills and knowledge that you need are there. Sometimes you're lucky enough to be able to hire it. Sometimes you have to train people into it. Once that's in place, I think one of the key roles of a manager is coaching, and carrying out that coaching is part of your work as a manager to enable people to be successful and to support them to be even more successful by giving them insights, both on the positive side and on the corrective side in terms of how to work better. So both are critically important. And then hire in the organization to have external coaches is also something that many of my clients have and feel to be very, very beneficial.
Okay, well, before I'm going to let you close off, Dwight, it was very good. Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for participating. Just to remind you, there's lots of links in the chat. You can also just go and download the chat as well. In the bottom right-hand corner, there's 3 dots. You can download the chat and I'll give you the links. So that's pretty easy. Anyways, over to you, Dwight. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. I just have to get this screen shared again. Thank you very much. Those are excellent questions. I always enjoy these conversations. I'm really looking forward to the panel on Thursday, where we can get into this even in more depth. So tomorrow is the session on balanced performance metrics. What we're going to do is looking at that model, dig a little deeper into a lot of the concepts that we've been talking about today, and give you some more insights into how each one of those are important, how you can use them in organizations, and as consultants, how we can use them to help our clients get insights into those areas as well. So please do join us tomorrow and then on Thursday for the panel discussion. And John, really nice to see you. Thanks for sitting in today. John will be one of the panelists next week. And there's the slide on that. And oh, that's it. I thought we had another session coming up, but so there's part session 3, which is the panel discussion. Brings us 1 minute past our time. Sorry about that. Thank you all for joining us today. I really appreciate that. And do take me up on my offer for any interventions by email. Happy to do that.
Perfect. Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.